On an Hourglass by John Hall, published 1646. My life is measured by this glass, by all those little sands that through pass. See how they press, see how they strive, which shall with greatest speed and greatest quickness fall. See how they raise a little mount, and then with their own weight do level it again. But when they have all got through, they give over their nimble sliding down and move no more. Just such is man, whose hours still forward run, being almost finished ere they are begun. So perfect nothings, such light blasts are we, that ere we are aught at all, we cease to be. Do what we will, our hasty minutes fly, and while we sleep, what do we else but die? How transient are our joys, how short their day. They creep on towards us, but fly away. How stinging are our sorrows, where they gain but the least footing, there they will remain. How groundless are our hopes, how they deceive our childish thoughts, and only sorrow leave. How real are our fears, they blast us still rend us, still with gnawing passions fill. How senseless are our wishes, yet how great, with what toil we pursue them, with what sweat. Yet most times for our hurts, so small we see, like children crying for some mercury. This gapes for marriage, yet his fickle head knows not what cares wait on a marriage bed. This vows virginity, yet knows not what loneliness, grief, discontent attends that state. Desires of wealth another's wishes hold, and yet how many have been choked with gold. This only hunts for honor, yet who shall ascend the higher shall more wretched fall. This thirsts for knowledge, yet how is it bought? With many a sleepless night and racking thought. This needs will travel, yet how dangers lay most secret ambuscados in the way. These triumph in their beauty, though it shall, like a plucked rose or fading lily, fall. Another boasts strong arms, las, giants have by silly dwarves been dragged unto their grave. These ruffle in rich silk, though ne'er so gay, a well-plumed peacock is more gay than they. Poor man, what art? A tennis ball of error, a ship of glass tossed in a sea of terror, issuing in blood and sorrow from the womb, crawling in tears and mourning to the tomb. How slippery are thy paths, how sure thy fall, how art thou nothing when thou art most of all. Hello, beautiful people. I'm Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, joined by Mr. Tim Rudisil. And the subject of our discussion this evening will be an esoterica clip. It has been quite some time since we have done one of these, so it seemed the right way to go. The esoterica subject of discussion will be, since Tim has been kind enough to agree to discuss it, the idea of consciousness being maintained without a body. Now, this will sound a little bit odd to people, so Yes. I'm going to have to provide a little bit of background or context for this before turning it over to Tim, just to frame up the question and maybe help our viewers not to be completely disoriented with the subject. Now, I don't doubt that Tim will probably jump in and turn this entire thing upside down based on some consideration that had not entered my awareness, but that's how it usually rolls. All of you will be used to that. So, for this idea of consciousness without the body, a lot of people might think immediately I'm talking about something like astral projection, this sort of thing. And I suppose using that as a general designation without getting into all the problems with it, yeah, maybe it could apply in that realm, but I'm more interested in the idea of consciousness before, after, between lives, and the idea of maintaining consciousness without a physical body is a very interesting one to me, because as soon as you look at the human body and how it works, you find out that it is all about space and a particular type of interaction of the consciousness with space. So, for example, we don't go on 4 legs, we go on 2 legs. Well, what does that do? That raises our head up higher than just about all, except for a tiny handful, of the largest mammals. So that gives us the ability to survey our surroundings 360 degrees around us and to have a different view of things than perhaps many other forms of life have. We have 2 eyes, and it is important that we have 2. It's not just in case one of them gets poked out with a heated iron by an evil member of the Inquisition or something. It's not just so that we have an extra. It's because it provides depth perception, which again is an adaptation entirely suited to space. Now let's take a look at the fact that we have 2 ears. That allows us to triangulate the position of a given sound that we hear. When something goes off around our ears, we can immediately process that and get a sense of direction. So these are just a few ways, a very limited set of examples that show how our adaptation is designed. This physical vehicle that we have is adapted for and designed to operate within space. And so as I continuously see these things as space, everything is spatial awareness, hierarchy. When we talk about it, it has to do with space. When we read a line of text, it's a sequence of characters, one after the other, and then it drops down in columns, to give the example of modern Roman style alphabets. Everywhere we see space, it's central to the entire experience here. You can even go back to things like Aristotle in De Anima talks about how man cannot understand without images. There must be some way for us to get our heads around whatever we're thinking about so that we can engage in that process of thought, leaving aside specific types of meditation that have as their goal the removal of all thinking. Now, think about when you say something like get your head around, to envelop, to be around an object that is 3-dimensional, right? Or even the use of metaphor and language to explain what we're talking about will very often take some particular scenario that we can remember from our own personal experience. And that experience is spatial because all of the input from the sense data gets gathered together to create this synesthetic impression, a memory or an imagined prospective thing, or an imagined thing that doesn't even really exist. It has to take a form within space. Now, this is an esoteric eclipse, and not everybody's going to be able to follow this, but in order to tackle this subject at all, I can't explain everything. Those of you who've thought about such things will find traction here. Those of you who haven't will have to do some homework first. Sorry, I've got to keep marching forward. In a particular area of consideration, we've got what's really a Neoplatonic arrangement going back to some Platonic roots, but we see it in heterodox Islamic mysticism, like got so thoroughly explored by Henri Corbin. They have this idea that there is a world of clay. Again, these are esoteric, metaphorical kinds of ways of tackling this, but in the world of clay, things are physical, right? This is the world where we are here. And because, as I said, this is Neoplatonic, the idea is that this world of clay is less stable than the place where things endure. But of course, the place where things endure is the realm of ideals, which is immaterial. So you got an issue there. The place where the ideas endure is the world of light, of the ideals, of the timelessness of these things that are realized in their limited ways and manifestations in the world of things. Now, according to this model, you have the world of light, of ideas, you have the world of clay, and there is an intermediate world, which is referred to in the esoteric terminology as a barzakh, which means an isthmus, which is a strip of land between two huge bodies of water. And this name barzakh, for this middle place between the world of ideas and the world of clay, refers to how it has this intermediate position. It acts as a bridge. It's both end, neither nor, right? And what's striking about that is it fits in with the Aristotelian dictum that man cannot understand without images, because this intermediate place is the place where ideas begin to take shape, or the place where material things begin to become less material. So in the realm of consideration, in a dream, I can see a friend and I just know it's a friend, but I don't know which friend it is. But in the course of the dream, that person talking to me may have 5 different faces of my friends. They are my friend. They're an in-between friend from this barzakh, which they call the world of fire, between this realm of light of ideals and this world of clay down here. So we can see how it's less immaterial in this middle realm than the realm of ideals. It is less physically anchored, more fluid, more susceptible to memory and imagination than the world of clay. But the key thing about it, and the reason I bring it up,
not imagination, imagery.
The imaginal, yes. Point taken, and a very good one. But I bring this up because, remember, I started all this talking about space, triangulating the source of a sound with your ears, depth perception with the eyes, and upright posture, etc., etc. Well, the key thing about this intermediate realm is that it begins to make the ideal, which is entirely unmanifest in its true form. It begins to give it a kind of space, but it's one that's fluid, that can shift, that can change. So we can have a friend who has 10 different faces, or a dream that screws with even the conception of time and sequence, because you go through the entire dream, and when you try to write it down, when you remember it, you realize you're coming back around to the point where you started. And you quite distinctly have the understanding as you write out the dream upon waking that the beginning of the dream was its end. So all these kinds of odd characteristics that lead to disorientation point to the issue of space, the stability of that space, and the way in which thought, or even reverie or meditation or contemplation, requires these objects, leaving aside, again, the specific type of meditation designed to make the mind devoid of thought, separate issue. So that is one angle of all of this, the way in which we have to have some kind of space, some kind of object of our awareness. Now, coming back to the body, there's another angle I came at this from, Tim, and that is the dream yoga that you can find referred to in one of Evan Wentz's books on, it might be Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines, I think it is. But there's a particular treatise there that he translates, and it talks about maintaining the conscious awareness of the person from the state of going to sleep to the state of waking up again. And that doesn't mean that you don't go to sleep. You do go to sleep. And yet, even given that transition, you maintain that awareness through that barzakh state, that intermediate state, that isthmus that is on the other side of this world of clay. And yet you come back into your awareness when you return. And that's got to be a qualitatively different condition of awareness. But now, that dream yoga is, as I recall, explicitly referred to as a stepping stone or training wheels for the eventual taking up of Bardo yoga, which is the idea of maintaining one's conscious awareness after death until the point at which you come into a new vehicle. But consider for a moment, if you will, viewers, if you think about this idea of
dream yoga as the baby steps. Well, you go to sleep, you maintain your conscious awareness. In theory, if this practice works out, you come back into your physical vehicle upon waking up, and it's relatively straightforward. You have a gap of maybe hours in the continuum that you consider to be this durational sequence, right? So you're picking up where you left off. You can expect now the sun's up, now the sun's down, right? It's a few hours later. You're hungry, you weren't before. No big change. You're talking about a difference of hours in who and what you are. The vehicle is the same, the body is the same, assuming you didn't have a stroke while you're asleep or whatever, right? You are still the same person, and you just have to take that identity and fit it in the world of clay into this durational line. But now imagine, if you will, that you're going to attempt to maintain your consciousness across the period between lives. Well, when you come back, so to speak, you might be a different gender, right? You might be a different race, right? Let's leave aside considerations about whether you could be another species, just to keep this discussion simple. And at the same time, you left with all the ideas and experiences and articulated shit in your memory and consciousness from this one life that is this, presumably in our example, a fully developed brain of an adult person who's had all these experiences and formed this identity. And then, pow, you're in some weird little slobbery snot-nosed motherfucker that just came crawling out of its mother's innards. The eyes are not yet able to focus on things. That's why we put dangling little mobiles over babies' cribs so that they can get used to distinguishing color and going, bleh. Like, oh, there's a difference between, oh, this is my hand. Oh, my hand does things, right? Oh, this is a part of me or it's separate from me? Where's that old stretching feeling of the umbilicus that used to be there? What the fuck am I, right? And so the gear is not even set up to receive a porting over of whatever the awareness was that would continue, that would constitute a continuity of consciousness, that would constitute some awareness separate from the body that would allow you to maintain some continuity between lives. So this gets very challenging to consider, not least because this last little bit, if this is an accident, if this manifestation out there here that we use has a substance only insofar as, let us say that this is like the imagination of God, and it differs from the imagination that I have, or the imaginal realm that I have access to or dominion over as a part of me, in that it is solid, it's real, right? It's here, and it relies upon the substance of that which is, that's given the gift colorless and clear, that continues through to everyone that will pick it up and share it without adding a tincture to that light. Here we have a framework to rely upon. This is the substance of God that we interact with out here in the world of things. It acts as an intermediary, a set of rules that we can all share within space and time, or at least duration. That gives it a solidity. It gives us the stamp that our wax of the interior will take as an impression. It gives us, we who are as unreal as a mirror, who have an existence only to the degree that we reflect something, it gives us something within to form the basis of what we are. But perhaps the entire thing is upside down because I'm thinking about how you maintain consciousness from down at this level that has to build it up in the way I talked about and has, depth perception and can triangulate in space and moves to the baby. Perhaps there's this other place where one is resident. So perhaps the question is less about how to bridge that divide, but where to stay in a certain fashion where one already is, so one can be immovable at the center. This is just the barest beginning of the kind of shit that one can consider if one wishes to seriously give this some thought. So I apologize for it being long-winded, but I had to tap any number of things to kind of place a few torches in the darkness so there's at least a dim amber light in this area that we want to give consideration to. So with that out of the way, Tim, what do you have for us?
Well, I would say to you that everything you have talked about is at the first level of consciousness. The first level of consciousness does not take into consideration the fact that there are many other levels of consciousness.
Though I do find it interesting you use level to refer to it, which is again spatial. You see my...
I am using that for your benefit, my friend. That is all. It's not really a level. It's a way of seeing and being. That's all. There are things you cannot see now, just as there are things you cannot hear now. They are part of what you will come into. You talk about space. All right, where does your space end? At the surface, yeah?
That is one of the training wheel aspects of this experience. It seems purpose built, so to speak, to create the sense of an individual unit that is separate from others. And the training wheels for that in matter are, this is where my skin ends and the rest begins.
And yet the very things like Tai Chi Chuan and Aikido,
your chi projecting it, showing that the limits of that body are not in fact the limits. The various kungs. Chi Kung.
Yes, quite. Yes, quite. The point is that all of these are amenable to change as you change. This is not a given. It will change with consciousness. And as consciousness changes, so will they. Many people are plagued by a feeling that they can feel things outside themselves.
You don't mean like phantom limb syndrome?
Well, no, I don't mean like phantom limbs. I mean like being able to reach out and know somebody's outside the house, somebody's outside the building, somebody's in the building.
Right, or like
they can feel them. I'm sorry to go ahead.
Intense relationships with all the emotional shit. Like I would wake up in the morning and go, I just got contacted. And then I'll go and sit down in front of my email and bang, it's there. Like, and you know it without question. Or, you know, you have the tales of a mother who knows that their child was hurt or killed or etc.
Whatever. Now, people feel this and they think it is unusual. It's not unusual. It's supposed to be very usual. You have simply set up further and further barriers.
Like we talked about in the past, the gates of sense are gates in the sense that they block, not in the sense that they admit.
Indeed, that is so. The gates of the senses block that which is there. This is the meaning of the fool on the hill. All right, that old Beatles song, fool on the hill sees the sun going down and the eyes in his head, blah, 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 blah. All this is really saying is that there is much more, Horatio, than ever was dreamt of.
In your philosophy.
Yes, quite. Indeed so. The thing is that you not only can feel these things, you can see them.
Or modulate them to whichever sense you are willing to accept as the avenue for their communication, which is where you get
willing to accept,
yes,
you
which
say?
is where you get into issues with synesthesia or, you know, different senses get overlaid on others.
Well, now, Oliver, what is synesthesia?
Well, the way in which it's described in the medical literature is this idea that that certain senses overlap with other certain sense channels. So it's like the idea with psychedelics that I tasted the colors, right? But to me, it harkens back more to the Aristotelian idea of a common sense, which is sort of the atrium that opens immediately to these gates of the senses, where a complete image, and this is important, a spatial one, because that's how our consciousness has been arranged at this point, takes shape. So synesthesia is, for me, more esoterically speaking, it is the function of the psyche, to use that as a technical term, with its etymological roots in mind, of course, not just as Freud, for example, would. It's a function of the psyche that assembles the different elements into a whole for consideration or encoding into the memory. And all of this raises the question of whether or not, the goal is to move beyond the point where you require a spatial understanding to conceive, or does it mean that you export and impose a spatial order in a place where there wasn't, so you have a habitation for your consciousness to take up space between lives? Or does it mean simply that you allow the sun to dawn on the countryside of the place within you, much like in a Tibetan danka, where you see the big disc behind the seated figure, and you think you're looking at the seated figure, but the people who created the danka with the circle like a halo behind the seated figure are trying to tell you that what you see through that circle, which is usually a world, is the actual person, not the seated figure that might have its leg folded up in a full lotus or one leg dangling down to show interaction with the world.
Okay. Now, taking all of this, we have ways in which we come to it. You can taste the colors, as it were. You can hear the colors. You can hear the passage of a thing.
See the sound, yes.
See the sound. Now, all of this means everything and nothing if it becomes the focal point of it all. It is merely one of the ways that you pass through. And I emphasize pass through. This is to say that your mind encompasses it. Your mind doesn't pass through in the usual sense, but enfolds it, encompasses it, becomes it, and taking it with it moves on to encompass and enfold other things, never having moved. It's constantly growing out toward itself.
The microcosmic parallel of eternity.
After a fashion and after a while.
And only to the degree that reflection exists in a mirror, which it doesn't.
Okay.
I'm asking.
No. In the way in which looking down from a place, looking up from a place, you reach a point where you can't see, right? All right. Now, take a consideration of looking down from a place that is all around to looking up from a place that is very, very small, infinitely small, and yet constantly grows, constantly grows. Whose is the consciousness, the one looking down or the one looking up?
If any of my models have any value at all, it's a distinction that is pointless, except insofar as any one of these tiny points looking up has within it the potential to become.
They all do.
The larger point looking down, and thereby it multiplies itself, isness, as it were.
Damn, I hate that old son of a bitch. Nicholas of Cusa. The infinitude that is encompassed in the microcosmically small is equaled only by the infinitude encompassed by the macrocosmically large.
The infinite maximum?
They share the one thing in common.
Infinite maximum and infinite minimum have as their common denominator the infinite.
But the consciousness that comes crawling out of its mother's innards doesn't have this yet. It does not have this yet, nor does the consciousness that, for lack of a better term, has carried over from the previous existence have this as yet.
So the model...
Both are partial.
So what I'm hearing from you, to try to summarize at least one part of this, is that why pay attention to stringing together a series of points on the circumference when what is at issue is the center point of the circle?
But where is the center point? Because it's not a circle. It's a sphere.
Yes, and
Where is the center
and
point?
to go back to Nicholas of Cusa, though I think perhaps others said it as well, the lasting metaphor he introduced is that God is a circle, the center of which is everywhere, and the circumference of which is nowhere.
Indeed, that is so.
So where is the center? Well, where do you want it to be? What's your pleasure, sir?
Exactly so, my friend. And yet, along the way, as you circumscribe this circle, as you navigate parts
Which
of
is
the
in
circle,
fact a sphere, as you pointed out.
a sphere, it gets even hairier there. What then will you do? Will you throw away all these infinite experiences that you have had circumnavigating this circle, this sphere, going into it, out of it, coming through it? Will you throw them all away? Or will you keep them ordered in memory, in lives, in volumes of lives, in ways that you alone know? Because each traveler moves differently. And so even though arriving at the same conclusion, he arrives by different means. Does he?
After a journey which did not take place, if we are to take the bit from the Macintosh translation of the Tao, beginning self did not begin, no ending can there be. Who holds fast to these truths shall win to immortality. But again, that's like climbing to the top of the mountain, and where do you go from there?
Just one step further off.
But what does that do, for example, if you're seeking a way to ensure some type of continuity of consciousness?
If you're seeking, you've lost.
Yes, which brings us around to the idea that the continuity of consciousness is already present. But the more we fuck about with this, or that I do, it again is where's the center? Or how real can the thing be that is merely a reflection that appears in a mirror? Because that mirror, yes, you can polish it as much as you like, but there's nothing to be reflected in that mirror if there's nothing to reflect. And if you say that the substance of what is...
But there is something to reflect.
And that would be the substance of...
There are many somethings to reflect.
Oh,
many somethings.
But no one thing?
They are all one thing, one at a time. Are they not all of them?
I've certainly got my hands full with this one at a time.
In which case, then, what makes you think that one at a time before or later would not be as hand-filling?
Well, clearly it must have been.
It must be. Do you steal?
I think the last time I stole something was as a 16-year-old at a drunk party, and I did not like it afterwards. No, I do not. This time, anyway.
Did not like it afterwards. Why did you not like it afterwards? Because you had profited from it. You reached out and got the thing, and it was yours now. You had the good thing.
Yeah, I had stolen it basely from a party where I was a guest.
So there were many considerations within the taking of the thing.
Yes, and it did not sit right with me, so I decided I would be done with that.
Mm-hmm. Again, that you would be done with it, when once you quite probably had not been quite so done with it.
Many are the ways.
Indeed so. There are many ways.
Infinite is the grace which makes them possible.
There's the way of violence. There's the way of violence.
Yes, in a previous clip, you talked about cleaning some teeth out of somebody's mouth.
In fact, I did, but only as a reaction to keep my own tender person from being injured by them, because they would have kicked me to death.
I do recall when I asked you one of the secrets of violence, and you said, well, a way to sum it up is it's the other guy's job to get hurt.
That's right. If he will have it no other way, then he has ordered it. And you, as the good agent of karma, must provide it. As somebody once said, it is not I who kills them.
But by that logic, it's not I who does anything, except insofar as one might be a well-polished enough surface to reflect the thing that does actually have reality in a way that does not distort it.
Aside from which, it's not your shit anyway, is it?
Now we step out of ontology and metaphysics to ethics. Yes.
Aside from which, this is not even mine. I don't control it. It will die and rot, but I will not. What is the difference between this and me? That's what you're asking, Ollie. What am I that is not this? What am I? Can you fit me into a jackass?
Let's set aside all the wonderful byways we could wind down with discussion of that. But yes, to keep it succinct, no.
Can we fit me into a horse? Can we fit me into a horse?
I would think not. Certainly not one that anyone would want to ride.
Why not?
What does a horse have of so many of the experiences that are unique to being a man? And what room does a horse have for such things? If it had such room,
he doesn't have the room.
It wouldn't be a horse, it would be a man.
He doesn't have the room for a man. If he had the room, he would be a man, not a horse.
Yes.
I'm not said.
I mean, because...
You will pardon me, I'm going to stay with my gender. But at any rate, not that I have in all the times I have been, but I will for this time. Let us say instead, does a man have room for a horse?
I have no direct experience of it, but my working hypothesis is that yes, that there is a ladder of being to some extent.
A ladder of being.
I mean, you wouldn't have the people of
coming
milk.
Coming from the infinitely small single cell, or possibly even what do they call those things? Prions?
Sure.
The prion thing, which is only almost all of a protein.
Right, so you're like partially alive, or a virus. Yes. All the way up to an entire macrocosm itself, containing the potential for all these things to come into being and flower and kind of course through their desires.
Potential for all of these things to come into blossom and flower, huh? And then fruit? Come to fruition?
Kick off yet further spores, which recapitulate that thing which is reflected.
And yet this requires an infinitude of what is called time, but is really only duration.
Which brings us back around to your favorite expression, I have all the time in the world.
Indeed I have. Indeed I have. But now we may not have all the time in the world in this clip.
We got a good another 10 minutes at least, so I
Sounds
will
good.
back off, having framed all this stuff, unless specifically asked to do to respond to something, and I will leave it to you to lay out, since I often kind of drag it here and there.
No. You don't get out that easy.
Very well then.
You must serve
I will toe the line.
in this. Yes. What then does a man and a horse, a snake and a spider have in common?
Varying degrees of capacity for consciousness, agency, and eventually, once you climb up far enough up this ladder of being, some reflexive consciousness, kind of like what Teilhard de Chardin mentioned in The Phenomena of Man, this dawning of a reflexive self-awareness. You can always expect odd things from Jesuit paleontologists.
Of course you can. But now, a spider understands certain kinds of interaction, especially a nice mobile wolf spider, a hunting spider,
and deals with
one that doesn't weave a web.
and deals with particular types of sensory input that we cannot conceive of at present, given the positioning and number of, for example, eyes.
8 of them, as a matter of fact. Some of them under his belly. Yes. And yet the spider goes along very nicely, does it not? The horse, as well, has a certain capacity for intellectual construct. So does a snake, though it cannot hear. Snake has no ears, you know.
Yes, but does sense vibration, apparently.
It does, but it only senses vibration. And yet a man takes all of these in and is able to talk about spiders, snakes, horses,
and
himself.
reflexively experience consciousness and agency by throwing a loop across a span of duration, where the imagination comes into force as something that's brought to bear on the lived experience.
Can it be that there is a physical capacity called the brain?
It certainly seems to play a central role, given that if you put a dent in mine with a hammer, game over.
Well, not necessarily. I can speak to that from past experience. But
That wasn't a hammer.
no, it wasn't a hammer, but that's close enough. The thing is that man's capacity to understand, the spider's capacity to understand, the snake's or the horse's capacity to understand, in the flesh, Ollie, is controlled by the functioning of the brain to a certain extent. Unless you have stepped beyond it. And then the mind,
Or psyche. Yes.
the psyche, comes into play. And there are recorded and understood all the events that have happened, not just as stored things, but as known things.
So you could call it, on the one hand, something like Akashic records, on the other, like a Christian philosopher's conception of eternity.
Well, if you wanted to go there, you could. Yes, I, on the other hand, look at it like a series of images that I can go to when I wish and draw forth from them what I need. They are, to me, merely the contents of my mind, and then later of my psyche. Now, they present themselves in different ways, whether they are the contents of the mind or the psyche. Yeah.
The latter being less contingent than the former, presumably.
Both of them being quite contingent, because there are levels beyond that, phases beyond that, strata beyond that.
Your remark here is,
Each of them unfolds into the next.
and your statement in the past about here we are far from causality.
Indeed so, sir. And here we draw nigh to the end of our time. And we will, shall we say, pick it up with the next esoterica.
Thank you.